In the early 1900s, a woman's place in society was defined by strict boundaries, beginning with the physical constraints of her own clothing. The Edwardian corset rigidly dictated her anatomy, compressing her ribs and internal organs to fit an idealized, immobile silhouette. That physical restriction mirrored a strict legal reality. In many Western nations, a married woman effectively ceased to exist as an independent entity. She surrendered her property rights to her husband, leaving her unable to sign contracts, control her own earnings, or even claim legal custody of her children. The intellectual world maintained similar barricades. Academic institutions and universities routinely denied women entry, backed by prominent physicians who argued that intense study would damage female reproductive organs or trigger nervous breakdowns. The walls holding women inside the domestic sphere relied entirely on a single pervasive assumption that female biology rendered them physically and intellectually incapable of surviving outside the home. But outside the home, the pace of human life was drastically accelerating. Electricity, internal combustion engines, and heavy machinery were building a louder, faster, and infinitely more powerful public world. You can see the immense scale of this transformation at the 1900 Paris World's Fair, where over 50 million visitors gathered to marvel at the mechanical technologies defining the new century. As women attempted to step into this rapidly modernizing society, the patriarchal establishment pushed back. Leading physicians like the German doctor Paul Julius Mobius published widely read texts arguing for the physiological imbecility of women, insisting their smaller brain size meant they belonged exclusively in the kitchen and the church. This was the point of friction, a century defined by high-speed technology colliding with a social order that demanded women remain in the static domesticity of the past. This diagram illustrates the expanding front lines of the movement. To claim a place in the broader rings of the state or the factory, women first had to reclaim autonomy over their own bodies at the center. One of the most effective tools for that physical liberation was the bicycle. It gave women independent mobility, allowing them to travel without chaperones, and forced the adoption of practical reform clothing, triggering widespread moral panic among conservatives. At the same time, women breached the highest levels of male-dominated intellect. Working in a drafty, unheated shed, a Polish outsider named Marie Curie unraveled the secrets of radioactivity, forcing the scientific establishment to recognize female genius. By asserting control over their physical movement and proving their intellectual capacity, women secured the necessary foundation to demand power in the broader economy. For working-class women in the industrial slums, the economy meant brutal exploitation. Wealthy industrialists hired women and children because they could pay them a fraction of a man's wage for the exact same labor. Those workers eventually realized their collective strength. In 1910, female chainmakers in the English town of Cradley Heath dropped their tools. Led by Mary MacArthur, they endured a 9-week strike and successfully forced their employers to implement a minimum wage. This economic leverage reached a peak during the First World War. As millions of men left for the trenches, thousands of women entered heavy industry, producing the artillery shells required to sustain the war effort. By 1918, female labor was no longer a supplemental resource. It was the primary infrastructure of the wartime economy. With their economic value proven, the demands for political equality swelled into mass movements. In 1908, 500,000 demonstrators converged on London's Hyde Park, creating one of the largest political gatherings the city had ever seen. But polite demonstrations rarely move entrenched power. When Parliament ignored their requests, leaders like Emmeline Pankhurst architected a militant, radical strategy for the suffragettes. Activists escalated their tactics to property damage and civil disobedience. When imprisoned, they went on hunger strikes and endured brutal force-feeding. Some paid the ultimate price, like Emily Wilding